Thank you, Brother Mahmoud. So I'm trying to figure out what the best way to do this is, because I don't want to embarrass anyone. If everyone could just close your eyes. If your car has license plate AYT0690, please get up and no one will look at you. It's a black Hyundai in case you forgot, and security is asking it to be moved because it's causing a security risk. So please move it. Thank you. Brother Mahmoud had a lot of really good words about how Islam views all of the acts that have happened as of late. There is a statement that was put out. If you go to orlandostatement.com, that is a joint statement from over 40 or 50 Muslim organizations and individuals condemning what happened at the Orlando shooting incident, and giving what the true message of Islam is, not one of violence, but one of peace. So with that, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Sister Maha Elgenaidi. She is the CEO of ING, a nonprofit organization with affiliates in Seattle and 20 other states that provide education about Islam and Muslims. She is the author of training handbooks on outreach for American Muslims, we'll get that later, a senior fellow of the American Leadership Forum, and recently named by San Jose Business Journal as one of Silicon Valley's Women of Influence. Maha has been recognized with numerous civil rights awards, including the Civil Rights Leadership Award from the California Association of Human Relations Organizations, and the Citizen of the Year Award from the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors. Maha has a graduate degree in religious studies from Stanford University and a bachelor's degree in political science and economics from the American University in Cairo. It's a great honor to have her here, and please join me in welcoming Maha Elgenaidi.
Thank you. I just discovered that Iftaar here is at 9:10. I'm coming from California where it's a lot earlier, so God help us. I want to begin by thanking MAPS for the invitation to be with you here this evening. And I also want to extend my welcome and greetings of peace to our esteemed guests this evening. Peace be upon all of you, and to my Muslim brethren, Assalamu alaikum and Ramadan Mubarak. The title of my presentation this evening is Building Peaceful Communities Through Education and Engagement. I don't know if I need to point this or not. Okay. There can be no doubt that while the nation is confronting various challenges in the months ahead that relate to a raucous election season, wars abroad, and race wars at home, that American Muslims are additionally facing a crisis of their own, dealing with how people perceive them. The 2010 polls of American sentiments towards Muslims looked like this. 1 out of 2 Americans had very negative views of Islam and Muslims, and nearly 8 out of 10 Americans believed that Islam oppresses women. 5 years later, anti-Muslim sentiments have gotten worse, even more dramatically. One poll tells us that the percentage of Americans viewing Muslims favorably declined from 35% to 27% in just 4 years. In fact, Arabs and Muslims have the highest unfavorable rating of any religious or ethnic group. According to another poll, Muslims rated most negatively of all religious groups in warmth, with a survey that showed an average of 40 out of 100. And according to a 2015 poll, only 21% of Americans have a favorable view of Islam. These polls clearly demonstrate that anti-Muslim sentiment is on the rise. What are the sources of anti-Muslim sentiment? They've changed over the years, in fact, over the centuries. If we want to trace its roots back to colonialism and the way that Western colonial powers processed information about the colonies, which they viewed as backwards, barbaric, and needing the guidance of the West to civilize or to progress. In the last few decades, however, the main sources of anti-Muslim sentiment have been the actions of Muslims themselves, the media, and hateful rhetoric, which I'm going to focus on. Since 9/11, Muslim terrorists and radicals have come to be associated with all Muslims and have resulted in a plethora of negative images. In recent times, ISIS has deepened these negative perceptions with their extreme ideology and heinous actions. The horrific attack in Orlando this week is an example of how the actions of one person can vilify an entire group. Since most Americans don't know many Muslims personally, the media are often the main source of misinformation about this group. This can be problematic since, in general, the media tends to focus on sensationalist issues. It is rare to see Muslims representing themselves on news programs, and when we see them portrayed, they're usually portrayed as terrorists. The media often interpret any action committed by a Muslim as a reflection of his or her religion, when it may have much more to do with other factors, such as mental health, family upbringing, personal struggles, as we're learning about the Orlando perpetrator, who was both gay himself and also homophobic. And finally, and probably the most dangerous of all sources, it is what has become known as Islamophobia, the industry that produces narratives and events that have the goal of demonizing both Islam and Muslims. Islamophobia has taken on different forms, including unremitting claims that President Obama is a Muslim, which many Americans continue to believe to this day, the demonization of American Muslims running for office, protests nationwide against the building of new mosques, and anti-Muslim rallies and legislative policies in various states. These separate incidences are all part of an accepted vilification of Muslims that has increased to dangerous levels in recent years. In addition to these are the daily comments and insinuations against Muslims by politicians, who shall go unnamed this evening, talk show hosts, and some religious leaders. Such comments would never be accepted against any other ethnic or religious group. And when they go unchallenged or unrepudiated, they only reinforce negative and dangerous stereotypes about Muslims that immediately lead to harmful consequences, such as physical assaults, including hate crimes, vandalism, and even some killings. Negative perceptions also drive wrong-headed policies and legislation that often result in civil rights violations here at home and often lead to conflict overseas. Now, in spite of this very disturbing background, which we have to talk about, what gives Muslims hope and comfort is their religion and the reality of who they are. We're now going to take a look at what it means to be a Muslim. And it might overlap a little bit with the previous speaker, and I apologize about that. I'm going to first look at terminology, and specifically terms that are often used interchangeably to mean the same thing when in fact they mean very different things. The name of the religion, Islam, comes from the same root word as salam, which you've heard us already use, which is why one of its meanings is peace. Islam is also defined as meaning following God's commandments or the state of peace, that one enters into by following God's commandments. A person who practices Islam is called a Muslim. Islamic is an adjective which describes things that are based on Islam, such as Islamic civilization, Islamic art, Islamic architecture, and so on. That word is used to describe non-human nouns, not people. An Arab is generally defined as someone originating from one of the 22 countries in the Middle East and North Africa, where Arabic is the official language. Arabic is the language that is spoken by most Arabs. Arabian is an adjective describing things of Arab origin, such as Arabian coffee. The Middle East is a geographical region in the world, including countries in Southeast Asia and North Africa. Completely different meanings that are often used interchangeably in the media and by ordinary Americans to mean the same thing. Demographics. It may surprise you to know that according to a 2011 Pew poll, it's estimated that there are over 1.6 billion Muslims in the world, which is about a quarter of the world's population. And as you can see on the slide, Muslims are indigenous to many regions of the world, primarily the continents of Asia and Africa, but also the Americas, Europe, Australia. There are 55 Muslim majority countries in the world. That's really important to grasp. That's about a quarter of the nations in the world. And sizable minorities throughout the world, in places like China, India, and France. One of the most common misconceptions about Muslims is that they're all monolithic, the idea that they're all the same, possessing the same culture, background, and attitudes. It's important to recognize that religion is one factor in the lives of people, and Muslims are no exception. People are impacted by many influences in their lives, which often outdo religion. Some significant influences include one's culture, education level, whether somebody has an elementary school education or a PhD, for example, the family and how they were raised, economic status, whether they're very wealthy or very poor, political situation, whether they live in a democracy or under a dictatorship. Additionally, a person's ideology influences his or her worldview of the other. How do they view people of other religions or those who are different than themselves? All of these factors play a role in a person's behavior as well as their understanding of the religion of Islam. Additionally, like people of other faith, Muslims observe varying degrees in practicing their faith, from those who are very observant to those who are Muslim in name only and those who are in between. Unfortunately, the media often portray all Muslims as one-dimensional in character and often explain actions by Muslims as being only motivated by their religion. Therefore, it's very important to recognize the diversity among Muslims and avoid stereotyping an entire group of people based on the actions of a few. So, what does Islam teach? There are 3 dimensions. It's not moving. Good. There are 3 major dimensions or aspects of the religion that Muslims worldwide understand about their faith. I'm going to briefly go over them. They're a bit in a different order than the previous speaker had them. Faith in God and other beliefs. The second dimension includes acts of worship. You might know them as the 5 pillars, which help Muslims spiritually connect with God while cultivating good moral character. And the third and the highest dimension, and the ultimate purpose of the 2, is to exemplify excellent moral character and behavior, a concept that is called ihsan, which is modeled by the prophets. So we look to the example of the prophet Abraham, the prophet Moses, the prophet Jesus, Muhammad, and others, peace be upon them all. The beliefs of Muslims, like Christians and Jews, they believe in the God of Abraham. Really important to understand. Who is the God of Islam? He is the God of Abraham. The proper name for God in Arabic is Allah, which is the same word that Jesus used when referring to God. He referred to God as Allah, or in Hebrew, El, or Elohim. These are Semitic words for the God of Abraham. The second belief, which is also shared by Jews and Christians, is the belief in angels, who are considered another form of creation. The most famous among them is the angel Gabriel, believed to be the one who brought revelation to all of the prophets. Muslims also believe in prophets or messengers chosen by God. They were all considered to be human beings, chosen by God to convey God's guidance to the rest of humankind. So Muslims believe in many of the same prophets that you find in the Bible. Muslims believe that all of these prophets conveyed the same monotheistic message. La ilaha illallah, there's no God but God, the God of Abraham. Jesus is considered one of the 25 prophets that is named in the Quran. His mother, the Virgin Mary, has an entire chapter named after her, which describes the birth of Jesus and his many miracles, peace be upon him. Muslims also believe that many of the prophets received a divinely revealed scripture or book. They include the scrolls revealed to Abraham, the Torah revealed to Moses, the Psalms revealed to David, the Gospels revealed to Jesus, and the Quran revealed to Muhammad. Many of the stories and commandments in the Quran are similar to those in previous scriptures, which is why we have so much in common. The way that I'm dressed, for example, is similar to how nuns traditionally dressed and how Orthodox Jewish women dress to this day. Muslims, like adherents of other faith, believe in the afterlife. That begins with the day of judgment, when people will be held responsible for their actions in this life. This particular belief, relates to the concepts of accountability, responsibility, and justice. Life is not a joke, it is real. Your actions are serious and you will be held accountable for them after the age of puberty. Last is the belief in God's will, which is the concept that God has knowledge of and control over all things that happen in creation. And as you can see, there are many commonalities with beliefs of Christians and Jews. The 5 pillars. Muslims, like people of other faith, are asked to perform certain practices or rituals as a way of spiritually connecting with God and improving their character. The first is the profession of faith, which is the belief in God and the prophecy of Muhammad. That's what makes a Muslim Muslim. But it's not only the belief in the Prophet Muhammad, it's the belief in all of the messengers before him, peace be upon them all, beginning with Adam and Eve. The second pillar is the 5 daily prayers, which are essentially periods of spiritual rejuvenation. That's what they're designed to do, to sort of have you stop and to reconnect with God. A lot of people ask, well, doesn't that interfere with your life? That's the point. It's supposed to interfere with your life. As in most other faiths, Muslims are also asked to share their wealth with those less fortunate. The idea behind this is that everything you have is a trust from God. You don't actually own anything. Everything is a trust from God, and that you're required to give something back to the community. Once a year, Muslims are asked to refrain from food and drink from before dawn until sunset during the month of Ramadan, which all of you are sharing with us today. And the last of the 5 rituals or pillar is the pilgrimage to Mecca or Hajj, which was required once in a Muslim's lifetime. And the pilgrimage or the Hajj essentially commemorates the life and trials of the Prophet Abraham and his family. The Hajj is a time of intensive spiritual rejuvenation, soul-searching, prayers, and is a reminder of the humanity and equality of all people. Since we're in the month of Ramadan, let me spend a few more minutes on that. Ramadan is the 9th month in the Islamic calendar, which is a lunar calendar, similar to the Jewish calendar. So it rotates throughout the seasons, moving back 11 days each year, which confuses a lot of people that we work with, because it comes 11 days earlier each year. During this month, able-bodied Muslims, people that can do this, abstain from food and drink during the sunlight hours. Before beginning the fast, Muslims wake up for a pre-dawn meal. Muslims continue their fast until sunset, when they break their fast with dates and water, followed by the evening prayer, which all of you will be partaking in. It's also customary for Muslim families to attend the local mosque after dinner for special nightly prayers, during which 1/30 of the Quran is recited each night, so that the entire Quran is recited by the end of Ramadan. That's why Muslims show up to the mosque every night during the month of Ramadan, which is a nightmare for neighbors and for police officers. They're thinking, what's going on in the mosque? That's what they're doing. They're becoming reacquainted with the Quran each and every year. That would be like a Christian reading the Bible, during a period of time every year. Since fasting requires good health, those who are physically unable to fast, such as the elderly, the sick, the pregnant or nursing women, travelers like myself, I'm not fasting today because I didn't need to. And of course, children are exempt from fasting. The purpose and benefits of fasting for Muslims are many, multifold. And why Ramadan, believe it or not, is considered to be the best time of year for Muslims. They fear it when it begins because they're thinking they're never going to be able to do this. Never. Especially here in Seattle, where you're actually fasting until 9 o'clock. That's pretty remarkable. But as soon as you get into it, the second or third days, you don't want it to end because it is such a beautiful experience. Fasting develops willpower and self-control, probably the most important thing. It develops compassion and sympathy for the less fortunate. It inspires gratitude for what one has. It helps people reflect on and improve their character. And it strengthens one's relationship with God, particularly if a Muslim is fasting throughout the year. It's a remarkable experience. Ramadan is also a time for Muslims to reconnect with the Quran, which they believe was first revealed in this month. Muslims are encouraged in this month to be especially charitable and generous, sharing food and money with those in need, inviting others to join in the fast, breaking, as we're doing here this evening. And in the US, you'll find that mosques often serve dinner nightly for people who are single or those who are in need. Ihsan, the last but actually the highest dimension for Muslims and the goal of the first two, beliefs and practice, is to inspire excellence in character and in all actions. If you're a street sweeper, be the best street sweeper that you possibly can be. If you're a physician, be the best physician that you possibly can be. And this is referred to ihsan in Arabic. This excellence impacts both one's spiritual relationship with God and one's interaction with people. Central to attaining excellence is upholding the golden rule of doing unto others as you would want them to do unto you. It's a principle that is emphasized in all religions, which is often the hardest thing to achieve in all of the religions as well. It's easy, it's fine, you have these beliefs, fine, you do these rituals. Praying 5 times a day is easy once you get the hang of it, right? Fasting, giving in charity, and so forth. What's difficult is having good character, being excellent in everything that you do. That is very difficult. And from this single principle stem most obligations and guidelines for behavior towards other people. You may not know this, but there is a version of the Golden Rule, which is also called the ethic of reciprocity in nearly every religion. I have some up here on the slide. It's often regarded as the most concise principle of ethics and the core tenet for interaction with fellow human beings. It's also the main goal of all of the religions, stated in a variety of ways. The following are just some of the few versions of the Golden Rule. Now that I've addressed some of the challenges of Muslims and given a brief overview of Islam and Muslims, I would like to end by discussing 5 ways that we can all use this information to stand up to hate and work towards a more peaceful and tolerant world, beginning first with our own community right here at home. But before I do that, I just want to remind folks that Muslims are certainly not the first, but hopefully they can be the last in a long line of groups who have been vilified and demonized in our nation's history. They include Native Americans, who are the original inhabitants of the United States that were massacred throughout the country. We talk about 9/11, we talk about what happened in Orlando as the biggest massacres, or they're not, right? Blacks who have long suffered first as slaves and then through segregation and Jim Crow. Jews, Irish, Italians, and Catholics generally at different periods in our history. When JFK was running for president, the fear-mongering against him focused on the threat that the Vatican would take over the White House, as per the cartoon on the slide. Here on the West Coast, the Chinese were excluded, and during World War II, the Japanese were interned, and so were the Germans to a lesser degree during both World War I and World War II. Communists after World War II were blacklisted. Blacks continue to suffer from racism, which is growing. It's not receding, it's growing. Latinos and Muslims have been and continue to be scapegoated and vilified, especially by a certain politician who will go unnamed. But our hope is that they will be the last on this list. To that end, I propose the following 5 ways to counter hate and foster harmony. The first and most important is to educate yourself, your family, and your community, and then reach out to your neighbors, co-workers, and the general public. The more that we can learn and then share what we have learned about each other, the less likely that fear-mongers can foment disunity and intolerance in this country. If you learn something new today about Muslims, we hope that you will join us by becoming an ambassador or agent for countering Islamophobia. Locally here, you have many programs that the next speaker will talk about. I want to mention one, which is an affiliate of the organization that I work for, which is ING. This is the Seattle Speakers Bureau that offers a variety of presentations about Islam and Muslims. They will have this presentation as well, using speakers to respect First Amendment guidelines for teaching about religion, which is incredibly important. We have to be able to teach about religion without preaching or proselytizing. They do this work in schools, universities, law enforcement agencies. Our training is post-certified. I'm an advisor to Post in California, where I've helped create hate crimes training for police officers, culture diversity training, and countering terrorism training as well. So our training is certified by Post, and they also present in other public venues. The director of the Seattle Islamic Speakers Bureau is actually here with us tonight. Her name is Rima Qadri. Rima, could you just stand for a second so people can see you? The speaker that will follow me will actually talk about other programs also that you have here at MAPS and other organizations that exist. The second way that you can build peaceful communities is to do interfaith outreach and engagement, which is imperative for learning about, fomenting understanding of, overcoming stereotypes and misconceptions about each other. It can be as simple as visiting the events of a faith community, like many of you are doing, individually or in a group. It may involve organizing informal discussions among people of different religions in homes or other comfortable locations. Bringing people of different faiths together in service projects is an excellent way of building relationships and mutual understanding. Around the country and right here in Washington, religious activists and institutions often come together for public advocacy for peace, social justice, and care for the needy and vulnerable. Our organization also has something called the Interfaith Speakers Bureau, where we go out, as Muslims, we go out with Jews, with Christians, with Hindus and Buddhists together in dialogue in front of large groups like this, where we both engage each other and then engage the public as well in conversation about various topics, and our local affiliate here has the same program. Third, it's important to build alliances and partnerships with other groups, in particular those marginalized communities that have also suffered from or continue to suffer from prejudice and hate. Today we see other groups standing with Muslims, and Muslims in turn standing with other groups, and together we can overcome prejudice and bigotry in whatever form or whomever it targets. I was especially pleased to see so many Muslim organizations rush to the aid of the LGBTQ families after the Orlando massacres by lining up to give blood and starting a fund drive which has raised so far $65,000 for the families of the victims. And they've just started this fund drive. I imagine that it's probably going to exceed over 100,000 by the end of the campaign. Four, stand up to bigotry when you see it or hear it. And I hear this all the time from Americans of other faith that I work with, about family members, about friends saying horrible things about Islam. What are you going to do about it? Right? It takes a lot of courage. It's not easy. But standing up to bigotry when you hear it is incredibly important. Why? Because it's unfair to expect the victim of bigotry, especially if they're minorities, to stand up for him or herself. It's the job of those observing hate speech or actions not to remain a bystander, but to speak up and be an upstander. If we all did our part, there would be no place for bigotry and hate in our society. In fact, I do a lot of work with the White House and the Department of Education, and I attend a lot of anti-bullying conferences. And according to studies in the space of education, the most effective way to stop bullying in schools is not by teachers, it's not by principals, but it is by friends of the bullied child to stand up for him or her, according to surveys. So what we need to do is to teach our children at a young age to do that, and we also need to be courageous ourselves to stand up for those who are victims of bullying or any form of bigotry. It's difficult, it requires courage, but you gotta do it. And finally, it's very important, especially during this traumatic time that we're in, that you don't forget to take care of yourself. Everyone is hurting right now. I know I am. So take the time to heal. If you're not doing well, you can't help other people. Bigotry and prejudice are ultimately rooted in a spiritual sickness. And by strengthening our own spirits, using the concepts and practices of whatever tradition you follow, we strike a blow against hatred and equip ourselves to combat hate more effectively. I couldn't do what I do without doing a lot of dhikr, remembrance of God, praying 5 times a day. I don't just fast in the month of Ramadan, I fast throughout the year. This is something that I intently do. I couldn't do what I do, and I've been doing this work for over 20 years. And things are getting a little bit more difficult. They're not getting easier, they're getting more difficult. And when I look out on the horizon with where we're heading in this election season that we're in, it terrifies me a little bit, right? It really terrifies me a little bit. And so we need to really take care of ourselves and make sure that we're in a position to be able to help if we're called upon to help. Above all, we need to remember that this struggle is not against the individuals that practice or propagate prejudice. We're not against them. They need our love. They need our concern, as do the victims. And by cultivating love in one's heart and mind, we can meet and defeat hatred by being inclusive of everyone. We're all siblings in humanity. In conclusion, I would like to end with this beautiful verse from the Quran, which really sums up why we're here today. By learning about each other and getting to know one another, we can create a more harmonious society and world. Hate and bigotry spring from fear, and fear springs from ignorance. The Quran is one of the major religious texts to present religious and cultural diversity as willed by God. And it shows great wisdom in doing so. In other words, Muslims believe that diversity is part of God's divine will and intention. Denying that diversity is denying God. By accepting our diversity and differences and treating them not as incentives for hostility, but as an invitation to get to know one another, we can build a world of harmony where the contributions of each and every one of us give meaning and value to all of our society, to all of us and to our society. Thank you, and Assalamu alaikum.